Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment, quiet, almost invisible, when you stop trying to be understood and something within you shifts. Not because you no longer care, but because you finally realize you were never meant to explain your soul to people who cannot hear its frequency. You start focusing on yourself, not in arrogance, but in liberation. You grow silent, not in defeat, but in power. And then, strangely enough, everything begins to fall into place. You must stay for this entire journey, because by the end of it, you'll understand why silence and self-focus are not passive states, but the most active, transformative forces you've been overlooking. Self-focus is not selfishness, it is self-alignment. This truth may sound simple on the surface, but in practice it requires a radical shift in how we view ourselves in relation to the world. Most people are trained from a young age to prioritize external validation over internal clarity. We're taught to consider how our actions look, how they affect others, how they measure up to expectations. But rarely are we taught to turn inward and ask, what is true from me? But focusing on yourself doesn't mean turning your back on others. It means finally turning your face toward yourself. It means asking questions that only you can answer. What do I feel? What do I need? What truly matters to me when no one else is watching? And when you begin asking those questions honestly, something shifts. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And when you're aligned with yourself, your actions begin to flow naturally. You stop seeking approval, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've realized that no amount of external validation can compensate for inner disconnection. You begin to move through the world with a quieter confidence, one that doesn't announce itself, but is deeply rooted. It's not loud, it's not flashy, it's simply present. Self-alignment means no longer betraying yourself to please others. It means making decisions that might disappoint people but bring peace to your soul. It's the moment you stop chasing what looks right and start choosing what feels right. And this doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of unlearning, a process of sitting with discomfort, of being misunderstood, of letting go of the false comfort that comes from being liked by everyone. But here's what happens when you stay the course. Life becomes lighter. Not easier, but lighter. Because you're no longer carrying the weight of pretending. You no longer need to rehearse your personality every morning. You don't need to guess what version of you someone wants today. You just show up, as you are, and that kind of honesty, first with yourself, then with the world, is what real alignment looks like. There's a deep power in this. When you're focused on yourself, you're not distracted by noise. You begin to see things more clearly, not because the world changed, but because your inner lens is no longer fogged by fear or insecurity. You stop reacting, you start responding. And that's the difference between chaos and clarity. People often confuse self-focus with arrogance or indifference. But true self-focus is humble. It says, before I try to fix the world, let me fix what's inside me. Before I give advice, let me sit with my own confusion. Before I rescue others, let me rescue myself from the habits that keep me stuck. This is not isolation, it is responsibility. You begin to understand that everything you do, every word you speak, every energy you emit, flows from the state of your inner being. If your inner world is in turmoil, so too will be your relationships, your work, your sense of peace. But when you take time to align with yourself, to center yourself, to care for yourself without apology, something remarkable happens. Everything around you starts to shift, not because you forced it, but because the energy you bring to life has changed. And this is why it's not selfish. It's necessary. Self-alignment is the foundation from which all true service flows. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you cannot lead anyone farther than you've gone within yourself. Focusing on yourself allows you to become a mirror for others, a reflection of what it looks like to live from truth rather than fear. The next time you feel guilty for turning inward, Remember this: you are not abandoning the world. You are re-entering it as someone who is whole, as someone who is clear, as someone who has remembered that peace does not come from being everything to everyone. It comes from being fully aligned with the one person you are always with. Silence is a language the universe understands. Not the silence that comes from defeat or suppression, but the kind that arises from deep awareness. A silence that listens, not to the noise of the world, but to the subtle, eternal rhythm underneath it. We are constantly surrounded by motion, conversations, demands, distractions, endless noise that fills every corner of our waking life. And yet, beneath it all, there is always silence. Not absence, but presence. A presence we have forgotten how to hear. In the modern world, we equate value with volume. If you're not speaking, posting, responding, performing, you're invisible. And invisibility has become synonymous with irrelevance. But what if that's not true? What if silence is not a void to be filled, but a doorway to be entered? When you stop trying to make your presence known, and instead begin to know your presence, something powerful begins to unfold. Silence becomes not a lack of something, but the presence of everything that truly matters. Think about the most profound moments in your life, the moments that truly changed you. Were they loud, or were they still? A quiet sunrise after a long night, a deep breath in a moment of uncertainty, the pause before a truth is spoken, the stillness after a decision is made. These moments are not filled with noise. They're carried by silence. Because silence allows you to feel without interruption. It gives you space to integrate, to understand, to connect, not just with the world, but with yourself. When you stay silent, you begin to hear things you could never hear before. You hear your own mind, yes, but more than that, you begin to recognize the space between your thoughts, the stillness that doesn't judge or demand. And it's in that space that you come home to yourself. You realize that the answers you were chasing out there have always lived within you, but you were too busy filling the silence to hear them. Silence is also a form of strength. When you resist the urge to speak, to explain, to defend, you reclaim your energy, you take your power back. Not because you're withholding, but because you understand the value of sacred restraint. You begin to see that not every truth needs to be shouted. Some truths are so sacred they lose their essence when forced into words. Silence preserves them, protects them, lets them grow deeper roots. People often confuse silence with weakness. They see it as passivity or disengagement. But in truth, silence is one of the most active states of being. It is deliberate, it is aware. It requires you to feel everything without numbing it with noise, to face yourself without distraction, to sit in the fire of your own thoughts and not run from them. That is not weakness, that is power. Silence also reveals, when you become quiet, you begin to see people more clearly. You notice who respects your peace and who feels threatened by it. You notice who listens only to respond and who listens to understand. You notice the difference between connection and attachment. You stop reacting, and in that space, truth emerges, because people's actions speak louder when you're not speaking over them. The universe has its own rhythm, its own timing, its own wisdom. And it speaks to us in silence, in those moments when you're not trying to force or figure out, but simply being. When you're walking alone and suddenly feel a wave of peace. When you're watching the wind move through the trees and realize it's teaching you about letting go. When you sit still and something inside whispers, "This is enough." That's the language of the universe. Not rushed, not loud, not demanding, but clear, steady, and timeless. When you feel lost or uncertain, don't always rush to find the answer. Don't always seek more advice, more opinions, more information. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is to get quiet, to be still, to let the noise fall away. Because when you stop speaking for a moment, the universe starts. And what it says cannot always be captured in words. in silence. You don't lose yourself. You return to yourself. You remember that you are not a product of noise, performance, or pressure. You are part of something far deeper, far older, far wiser. And in that space, when you listen deeply, you realize everything you've been chasing is already here, just waiting for you to be quiet enough to notice. Detachment from external chaos brings internal clarity. And yet the mind resists this truth because it has been trained to find meaning in the noise. We believe that if we're not constantly reacting, constantly plugged in, we're falling behind. But the opposite is true. The more we get pulled into the chaos of the outside world, the opinions, the trends, the comparisons, the further we drift from our center. And from that place of distance, everything feels confusing, overwhelming, and fragmented, so we try to fix the outer world, hoping it will calm the storm within. But chaos outside cannot be healed by more chaos within. The clarity you seek will never be found in a louder reaction. It comes in moments of stillness, when you no longer need to respond to everything, when you no longer take every disruption as a personal attack, and when you stop being the emotional echo of everyone else's noise. Detachment does not mean disconnection. It means choosing your focus. It means understanding that not every battle is yours to fight, not every opinion is yours to absorb, and not every storm is yours to sail through. There's a quiet strength in letting things pass through you without becoming them, in watching a situation unfold, observing your emotions rise, and then choosing not to attach your identity to the moment. You're not ignoring life, you're respecting your energy. You're learning that being present doesn't mean being reactive. It means being aware enough to choose where your energy flows. This is where clarity begins, when you become the space through which chaos passes, not the chaos itself. You watch without grasping, you listen without absorbing, you stand still while everything around you moves. And strangely, from that stillness, you begin to see everything more clearly. You begin to recognize patterns that were hidden when you were too close. You understand people's behavior without needing to fix them. You realize some problems are not yours to solve, and some truths do not require your commentary. In this space of detachment, your inner world reorganizes itself. You see your own patterns, the ways you used to react, defend, or try to control outcomes. And with awareness, you begin to let go. You let go of the need to be right. You let go of the need to be understood by everyone. You let go of the compulsion to explain your soul to those committed to misunderstanding it. You begin to value peace over performance, stillness over struggle. Clarity is not always a lightning bolt. Sometimes it comes like the slow rising of the sun, where what was once shrouded in darkness begins to take shape. What once seemed urgent no longer feels important. What once triggered you no longer reaches you, not because the world changed, but because you did. Your stillness became stronger than the world's noise. Your peace became louder than the chaos outside. And here's the beauty. When you stop reacting, you start receiving. Life begins to speak to you in more subtle ways. You notice the gentle nudge of your intuition, the way certain paths feel lighter than others, the synchronicities that appear, when you're no longer racing through life distracted. Clarity is not something you chase. It's something you uncover when you stop chasing everything else. When you detach from the chaos, you begin to see that much of what seemed urgent was just noise dressed as necessity. You begin to prioritize what actually matters. Inner peace, authentic connection, meaningful work, and the quiet knowing that you are living in alignment with yourself. And this awareness becomes your compass. You no longer need constant validation because clarity becomes your own authority. You trust yourself, not because you have all the answers, but because you're finally listening to the right questions. When life feels loud, when the world pulls at you with 1,000 voices, take a step back, not to run away, but to return. Return to that space within where clarity lives, where peace is not something you earn, but something you uncover, because when you detach from the noise, you finally hear the voice that has always been there, calm, quiet, and true, the voice that doesn't shout, but gently reminds you, you are already home. When you begin to focus on yourself, something remarkable happens. Your energy returns to its rightful place. For so long, it's